Well, you're right. I did cover the case a lot. I actually interviewed Attorney General Keith Ellison. Yeah, I interviewed him over the summer, I believe. Yeah, I have my eyes on this case. So I feel like it's good to be wrong.
Yeah.
I'm very happy that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love to be proven wrong. I think I have my doubts. I thought he would get convicted of manslaughter, but I
Mm-hmm.
didn't think it would be murder. I
Yeah.
didn't think it would be all three counts. So it is phenomenal to be wrong. Just looking at it as an isolated case for George Floyd's family.
Mm.
We can look
Yeah.
at it in a larger perspective. We can definitely break that down. But just thinking of George Floyd's family, I can
Mm.
only imagine the trauma they went through. I'm sure they saw the George Zimmerman trial. I'm
Yeah.
sure they know how the officer who killed Tamir Rice, no
Mm.
no kind of punishments whatsoever, no indictments for the officers who are a part of Breonna Taylor's death. So I'm sure they didn't know what was coming.
Mm.
So for them, and what I've heard from their statements is that they are grateful. And my call is to Senator Tim Scott.
Mm.
Senator Tim Scott, the only black Republican in the Senate, who says that he cares about police reform.
Hmm.
He says these things matter to him.
Mm.
He delivered an extremely weak Justice Act, if you want to call it that, but that didn't go through because it didn't even deal with qualified immunity, right? But he
Right.
says he cares. So my message goes to Senator Tim Scott. How powerful would it be if you voted for
Mm.
the George Floyd Policing Act? If you
Yeah.
voted for it, because you claim you care. You claim you have been profiled by police.
Mm.
You claim that you have dealt with racism. And for all of your critiques of Democrats and how you feel like black Democrats treat you, when you were upset about Joe Biden saying that you ain't black, although he apologized hours later, now is your moment to show up, because we can't depend on Joe Manchin.
You know,
We can't depend on Kristen Sinema. So right now, Tim Scott, you can show up and bring some other folks with you. So my message right now is the George Floyd Policing Act. And I'm waiting for Tim Scott to tweet, because the minute he does, I'm going to respond to him. Does this mean you're going to vote? That you're going to bring Lindsey Graham with you,
right.
your other South Carolina senator? So right now, you've broken down policy. I've broken down policy. We've made it really, really plain on what this Policing Act does. Does it solve everything? No.
No.
But in the name of George Floyd, Senator Tim Scott, show up.
Show
Show
up,
up.
and I gotta say, show up and stand for truth regardless of who's speaking it. That's one of the things that I often, one of the issues I have with people who happen to be both black and Republican. I care not what label you put on your political affiliation.
Exactly.
I care about whether or not we're both watching videotapes where black people are being shot and reaching the same conclusions. That should not be predicated upon your political affiliation. When a person like Tim Scott has the ability to vote for what is right, which is to defend black people from being murdered by police, and chooses not to, that is not just problematic, but that is anti-blackness personified. When you are so bound up in these pre-existing and preordained boxes, and you're so committed to fitting within the confines of that box that you will only fight with the tools that the person who created the box will allow you access to, you are the problem. It's not just Joe Manchin. We know who Joe Manchin is. Joe Manchin is going Manchin. That's what he does. That's what he's going to do. But you should not, Tim Scott, you should not, Republican senators who are watching the same things that the rest of us are watching, you should not be so bound up in your political affiliation that you can't vote for a bill that would have prevented a number of the incidences that we've seen. Not all, as you say, it is not a perfect bill. But it would bring us closer to some semblance of freedom without the entire black nation or black portion of this nation having to hold its breath because we just don't know how this case is going to turn out.
And you bring up a really good point, Larry, and I'm so happy you say this. There is this idea that we as black folks, we are die hard for Democrats. I always say the largest voting bloc are non-voters. Sure,
Right.
the folks who turn up to vote, who show up to vote, yes, we are Democrats, but there is a huge amount of us who
Yeah.
are not voting at all. So really the most powerful voting bloc is the non-voter. And to your point, we're not married to any kind of political party. Our lives are just better under a Democratic administration. But here's your moment. Here is your moment
Yeah.
to show up and show
Yeah.
what you got. That's what I'm saying. So, I was watching the press conference with George Floyd's family, and they kept on saying the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. They repeated it. This must be passed. This must be passed. So, in the name of Blanche Bruce, the first black senator who was a Republican, in the name of Hiram Revels. I'm sorry,
Come on now.
Hiram Revels being the first black senator, Blanche Bruce the second black senator. During Reconstruction, they were Republicans. Show up, Tim Scott. Show up.
Yeah.
So I want to see policy changed. And as I was sitting here waiting for the verdict, it was just deja vu. And I went back and looked at my old tweets. It's just deja vu
Yeah.
all over. And it's a complicated feeling, Larry. Like on one point, this is huge. This is the first time in Minnesota history that a white police officer has been convicted of an on-duty murder,
That's right.
right? Now, a police officer in general was of course, Muhammad Noor, who was a black
is-
police officer
Who is currently incarcerated
who's currently incarcerated.
for having
Yeah.
killed Justine Diamond, I believe her name was.
Yeah.
A white woman.
Exactly. And so it's a delicate, it's just complicated emotions because on one end you are happy it wasn't the other side. My God.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just not sure what it means just yet.
So I think I'm glad you raised that because the complexity of how we feel, I think, is something that we don't often allow ourselves the luxury of just sort of being in. And I think it's important because when I first heard the verdict, I sent my sister a text and I was like, well, did you hear? And she said, I haven't seen anything. I've had the TV off all day. She literally did not even want to know what happened because she presumed the worst. And so when I told her, she was in such a state of disbelief. And she said, the emojis tell it all sometimes, even better than words can. And we're texting back and forth with these images and these memes and gifs to sort of describe how we're feeling. And the thread between all of them was, on the one hand, righteous indignation and justification, feeling like we've been validated. On the other hand, feeling like one young person who said to a reporter on, I think it was NBC, okay, today we celebrate, tomorrow we get on to Dante Wright. And the fact that right after this, there's another incident just down the road that took place, acknowledging that we are glad that Chauvin's trial out of the four was the first. He was the most, his acts, I think, were the most heinous out of all this, although all four of them were there and were participants. And recognizing that we got to do these trials again, although I suspect there will be plea deals struck post extremely quickly. They are in conversation
Absolutely.
already about plea deals for the remaining officers. But the recognition that we have so many other cases that have happened since George Floyd, and the complexity of being glad about this moment while knowing that this moment does nothing to change the balance of power. It does nothing to undermine this systemic racism that we experience, the fear, the trauma that we all experience when we see those lights behind us in a car, when you hear that siren. And so there's a complexity of emotion. And I think that too is part of what it means to be Black in this country, is to have to balance all of those emotions at once while trying to squeeze out as much joy from something that is so utterly joyless, so incredibly encompassing with its pain. And yet we have to find ways to persist even through that.
And I do want to add this because you and I know, Larry, and I always steal this from you. I steal a lot of your lines. That voting is
It's
just one
mutual.
tool in the voting is just one tool in the toolbox. You
Yeah.
and I know this.
Yeah.
But can we take a minute to honor the people of Minnesota who elected Attorney General Keith Ellison in
That's right.
November of 2018?
That's right.
See, elections have consequences. He's elected the first black man to be Attorney General of this state, and less than 2 years later, we have the killing of George Floyd. I don't know if this would have happened without Attorney General Ellison. I truly don't know. So elections have consequences. This is what happens, y'all. Again, just one step in the toolbox, but this
Right.
is what happens when you vote in your local elections.
I'm
And
so glad you pointed that out.
yes,
Because
yeah,
they could have had someone like Ken Paxton, right? They
ex-
could have had the Texas Attorney General, who instead
exactly.
of pursuing officers who have been involved in the killing of unarmed black people, was instead filing lawsuits to support the big lie, the voter
There
fraud
we
lie, to
go.
help undermine the election, to help undermine that democratic, peaceful transfer of power. You could have had someone like him, but by
Or
showing
may I
up,
add,
yes,
you could have had another black man named
ooh,
Daniel Cameron.
ah,
So it's not all skin. Let's quote Miss Zora. Not
come
all our
on
skin
now.
folk are kinfolk. Let's just be clear. I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I
No,
just
no,
want to
no.
put that out
That
there.
was that I will happily hand over the mic for us to raise up that name, because we need to always remember and never forget. But you could have had someone like that, and this is why when someone like L. Joy Williams says democracy is 365, it's a constant marathon of driving. If you take your eyes off the road, you take your hands off of 10 and 2, there's someone right there to run you off the road, and we just have to be clear that while we are here and while this is our reality, constant vigilance and attention to how this country is operating, who is in charge, who is in key positions, how did they get there, and if they got there through elections, being so intentional about focusing our energy and our power. Yes, we take it to the streets. Yes, we organize with community and faith-based organizations, and we have to be civically engaged, because with all those protesters who took to the streets for months after George Floyd was murdered, if you do not have an effective attorney general who is going to shepherd this case through, if you do not have a team of lawyers who are properly positioned to center the needs of racial justice in this moment, we do not have a conviction for Derek Chauvin. We might not even have had a trial. And that's the interconnected nature of fighting for civil rights in a country that has literally based its entire economy and national success on the oppression of the least of these.
I also want to take a moment just to honor 17-year-old Darnella Frazier.
Ooh.
It really begins in many ways with her. This 17-year-old brave, courageous teenager films the killing of a man right in front of her, and has the bravery to film this. And because they would have waited eons to release that body cam footage.
You
You
know
know how
it.
they do.
That's
They
right.
they say we have body cam, but they want to wait 4, 5, 6 months to release the body cam footage. Look at Karan Nazario, the lieutenant who was stopped. That happened in December. So I want to take a moment to shout her out. If it wasn't for that video going viral right away, who knows how we needed this. We needed the international outrage. We needed the
Right.
local outrage. We needed the national outrage. So because of her, there's many steps in this. Why we had this conviction, many steps. And I always say this: when there is progress in our communities, progress for us, it's not these people in power who somehow care about us. It's
Right.
us rising up. It's
Right.
us saying no more.
That's
It's
right.
us saying we're not, the reason why we have the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, is not because Lyndon B. Johnson loved black people. It's because we said no more.
Right.
We said
Right.
no. We need change now. The reason why we have a black woman as vice president is because we said you must have a black woman VP. So yeah,
Right.
I just wanted to honor Miss Darnella Frazier. And there are things to celebrate, but as we're both saying, it is just complicated. Just
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah. And as it pertains to the young sister and even all of the kids They were babies. These were
Babies.
children. And one of the things that always is top of mind for me is what nature of care have they received, right? Everyone wants to talk about the settlement and, the large dollar amount that was affiliated with that dollar amount, which I guarantee you the entire family would trade in a heartbeat if they could get their loved one back. But I think about the pain and the hurt that you heard in the voices of those little girls as they were testifying. And I think about who's caring for them. Are they getting the mental health care and the emotional support that they need? And then I think about everyone else in that community who is now going to be navigating city streets where there is the distinct possibility of reprisals and retribution. We know that there are a lot of officers who are very upset. Now, I know half the police department that Chauvin was a part of, darn near, came out to testify against him. Something I don't know of a single other trial where I've seen that level of testimony, that level of breaking of the ranks of the blue wall. But we know that for every officer that testified, there are a heck of a lot of officers out there who are very angry about this outcome. And so not just the young sisters who were involved in this case, not just for the brothers who testified, that elder who testified, but for all of us who live in communities that have police departments that have been infiltrated with people, with actors, with employees, with staff members who agree with the January 6th insurrection, who agree with what Derek Chauvin did. Be mindful, be watchful, and be careful, because we are in a time now when the aftermath also comes. So while we are finding whatever joy we can in this moment, while we are trying to balance the complexity of the emotions that we have, let us also be aware that there is not everyone is rejoicing. And some of the people who are not rejoicing are in positions of power that still are able to exercise that power over our lives. So this is also a time to be very careful, to be very watchful, be aware of your surroundings, be on the lookout.
I do want to say that 6 years ago yesterday, Freddie Gray Jr. died. Just want to remind people, 6 years ago yesterday, he was arrested on April 12th, 2015, but he would die April 19th, 2015.